Welcome to the lecture on Chapter 4, Social and Behavioral Sciences and Public Health. This chapter addresses certain questions such as how does culture affect health? How does religion affect health? How other factors in social system influence behavior and how they can be addressed? We look at what tools are available to explain and predict health behavior. How transportation plans improves health. How does nutritional programs affect health? How has the Back to Sleep campaign been so successful to prevent sudden infant death syndrome? So these are some questions that we address in Chapter 4. So objectives of this chapter include explain relationships between social and behavioral sciences and public health, illustrate how socioeconomic status affects health, illustrate how culture and religion affect health, describe the relationship between income and socioeconomic status and health, describe key categories of social determinants of health, describe the role of theory in changing health behavior, identify the 3 levels of influence in which theories and models are categorized, and provide examples of theories and models corresponding to these levels, explain the principles of social marketing, identify the steps of the proceed planning framework. So how is public health related to social and behavioral sciences? When we look at the development of these sciences, social, behavioral sciences, and public health, we can see that these have a correlation. In 1800s and 1900s, all these sciences are connected to each other. These subject areas share a fundamental belief that understanding the organization and motivation behind social forces, along with a better understanding of the behavior of individuals, can be used to improve the lives of individuals as well as society as a whole. So the 19th century development started with Industrial Revolution in Europe as well as in the United States. Various social and economic inequalities were addressed in this time. So let's look at a table which summarizes many of the contributions that the social sciences make to public health. This table shows us what are the contributions of various social and behavioral sciences to public health. Disciplines such as psychology, sociology, anthropology, political science, economics, communications, demography, geography, all these have made a significant contribution to public health. From the psychology, we identify the theories of change. So we look at this change model to identify how behavior can be altered. And from sociology, we identify how organizational behavior. We learned about systems thinking. We learned about social impacts on individual and group behaviors. And from anthropology, public health learned about social and cultural influences on individual and population decision making. So anthropology is study of human culture. So how these culture can influence health. And then coming from political science, how can we implement policies? What are the impact of government on public health decision making? And then from economics, we understand the micro and macroeconomic impact on public health and healthcare system. We look at various health organizations and insurances and how these economic studies influence public health. Now looking at communications, the role of media and theory of and practice of mass and personalized communication affect health information. Again, the HIPAA, or Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and how it can be how HIPAA influences health behavior and how can this health information can be protected. So we learn from communication. and looking at demography. So understanding the demographic changes in the population, like aging, migration, differences in birth rates, and their impact on health and society is what we learn from demography. And then geography, based on geography, it's a big determinant of disease. Based on where they are from, the diseases and vary. Certain communicable diseases has more origin in tropical climate because of the favorable tropical climate and more bacterial growth in tropical environment. So based on the impacts of geography on disease and determinants of disease, we learn about it has provided much contribution to public health. Let's look at how are social systems related to health. We understand that social systems have a complex interaction with public health because we as humans are constantly interacting with our surroundings. We are interacting with people, institutions, communities, and policies, and this relationship between individuals and social systems is reciprocal, meaning we influence our social systems and our social systems influence us. So because of these constant interactions, efforts at improving population health require an understanding of this complex interaction between social systems and health. So what are some social systems that influences our health? The interpersonal, mainly family, friends, peers, maybe institutional, the rules and regulations of institutions such as schools and places of environment. In community, the religious or cultural practices, their formal and informal social norms, and individual characteristics such as our knowledge, attitude, beliefs, age, sex, education, and some general socioeconomic and cultural environmental conditions such as education, housing, work environment, healthcare services, availability of healthcare services. It's all influences our health. So there's a complex interaction between the social systems and population health. So next we'll look at how do we influence behavior, how the social system influence behavior. Now let's look at how our social system influencing our behavior. According to Berkman and Kawachi, they argue that social system influence behavior by shaping norms, enforcing patterns of social control, providing or not providing opportunities to engage in healthy behaviors, encouraging selection of healthy behaviors as a coping strategy. So looking at shaping norms, let's look at a community where everybody is wearing helmets when they drive the bicycle and they ride the bicycle. So that becomes like a norm, or people see someone wearing it, so they role model that kind of behavior. Okay, next is enforcing patterns of social control. Having a curfew of the society, having rules and regulations in the society can influence certain behavior. For example, having teenagers not to be outside after midnight by themselves if no adults are there. So those such social norms can prevent violence in that regions. Thirdly, providing or not providing opportunities to engage in certain behaviors. For example, if you have a community pool, so people will have the encouragement to learn to swim, and thus it prevents drowning and also serves as a form of physical exercise and social cohesion. So having that opportunity to access to community pool will engage in certain behavior, or having just a sidewalk to walk. Okay, that encourages certain behaviors such as walking. Next is reducing or producing stress with certain behaviors may be an effective coping strategy. For example, as a student, you have a lot of stress that you're going through, so you develop certain strategy to deal with the stress. Some go for a walk, some may engage in unhealthy behaviors such as binge drinking to blow off the steam. So how will you deal with stress? is pure behavior. You learn some effective strategy, and if it's meditation that works for you, you do that. You go for walking, you go hiking. So what is the effective coping strategy that you utilize? You engrade it. When it's become a habit, you continue to use that. Even if when you are in a higher stress, automatically it comes to your mind that, okay, I should not do any drastic means. I don't want to do a binge drinking and take that mind off, but let me do something effective. Let me go for a hike. Let me go for a walk. Let me do a swim with a friends. Let me party with some friends, and have some good effective strategy, or talk to your family, maybe at the least, or maybe praying. It's a very good strategy. Whatever effective strategy that you incorporate in your life that becomes a habit and you continue to do it. So that is how social systems influence our behavior. Now let's look at how do socioeconomic status, culture, and religion affect health. These three key components of the social system have a strong relationship with health. In the United States, socioeconomic status refers to the family income, educational level, or parents' education level, or professional status, or parents' professional status. And we see that the health status, which is measured by life expectancy of a country, is strongly associated with socioeconomic status. Even in United States, we can see an income disparities or socioeconomic gradient of health status, which means that individuals with higher socioeconomic status tend to have better health outcomes compared to those with lower socioeconomic status. Moving on to furthermore on socioeconomic status, let's look at that in detail. Let's look at some of the ways that socioeconomic status may affect health. Based on the living condition, there is increase in sanitation, reductions in crowding, methods of heating and cooking would differ based on the living condition. Let's look at an example of homelessness versus some people who is living in their own homes. Let's look at overall educational opportunities. Based on education, our health behaviors and health outcomes would differ. We have greater appreciation for factors associated with disease based on our education. And based on educational opportunities of women, there's a higher impact on the health of children and families. And based on occupation exposures, certain lower socioeconomic jobs are associated with increased exposure to health risks. Let's look at an example of working in mining industries, where the health exposure to asbestos or coal dust would increases their health hazards, and access to goods and services, such as having a protective gear or high quality foods and services, including medical and social services. It affects their health. Family size. A larger family size is traditionally associated with lower socioeconomic status and lower health status. And exposure to high-risk behaviors. When there is social alienation related to poverty, it may be associated with violence, drugs, and other high-risk behaviors. Then look at environment. Lower socioeconomic status is associated with greater exposure to environmental pollution, natural disasters, and danger of the built environment. Exposure to radon, exposure to lead because of living in a house which was painted a long time ago. Because of the environment, there can be health status differs. Moving on to the next. Now let's look at how culture may affect health. Culture helps people make judgments about the world and decisions about their behavior. Culture defines what is good and bad and what is healthy or unhealthy. This may relate to their lifestyle patterns, beliefs about risk, and beliefs about body type. It defines our food choices and methods of food preparation and preservation. Some societies reject strenuous physical activities. Some cultures have traditional cultural practices or medical practices that influences health. Certain herbal medicines or herbal practices are practiced by certain cultures. Some cultures also have this complementary or alternative medical approaches. Nowadays, we are integrating complementary and alternative medical practices along with modern medicine to influence certain behaviors. Some examples are for preparations, for example, vegetarian or Mediterranean diet, cooking methods. Some uses boiling, some US have different methods of cooking. History of binding feet in China, female genital mutilation, role of exercise. These are all ways that culture affects health. Furthermore, culture determines the level of urgency to recognize symptoms, seek care, and communicate symptoms. For example, certain cultural differences would delay the primary prevention, and they might self-medicate and do herbal medications to prevent for primary preventions rather than seeking a modern medical care. Certain cultures do not believe in having their child for essential dental care at as early as 3 years. They think that it's unnecessary to do that at that time. So based on the culture, they determine the level of urgency. And we all know that low degree of social support may be associated with reduced health-related quality of life based on how much social support we have, maybe families or work structure or social support. It influences our quality of life. Some cultures rely on type of interventions that are acceptable. For example, there's varying degree of acceptance of traditional Western medicine, and there's reliance on self-help and traditional healers in certain cultures, more than one another culture. And furthermore, culture is related to the response to disease and to the interventions. So there is these cultural differences can be seen in follow-up, adherence to treatment, and acceptance of adverse outcomes. Let's look at how religion affects health. So religious practices may put individuals at increased or reduced risk for certain diseases. For example, use of contraceptives or prohibition of alcohol consumption reduces the risk for HIV or AIDS, and prohibition of alcohol consumption reduces the risk for any alcohol-related diseases, addiction, pancreatitis, cirrhosis, or anything. In some religion may affect the response to symptoms. Certain Christian scientists reject medical care. Some reject medical blood transfusions or medical interventions. Some religions have a different attitude towards abortion, stem cell research, or end-of-life treatment. So these religions may affect the types of acceptable interventions for their individuals who practice a religion. And religion also influences response to disease. For example, most of the religion accept prayer as a mode of interventions, or prayer as a response or an intervention to a disease. So prayer has found to have a great role as an intervention to alter the outcome. Now let's look at what are social determinants of health. A subset of all the determinants of health, social determinants of health refer to the conditions in which people are born, grow up, live, learn, work, play, worship, and age, as well as the systems put in place to deal with illnesses that affect the health and quality of life. These conditions are shaped by a wider set of forces, including economics, social policies, and politics. So let's look at some key categories of social determinants of health. What are some key categories of social determinants of health? Social status in itself, which determines income, education, occupation. Based on their income, education, occupation, health differs, or their life longevity differs. Social support, having someone to joke with, having a social support of family and society itself is a key category, key determinant of health. Whereas social inequity or social exclusion or racism or discriminations, it affects the health. Lack of opportunities for education, leisure activities, or other community services, directly and indirectly, is a key determinant of health. These discrimination results in anger, fear, distress, or stress that individuals do not seek out such opportunities. Coming on to food, having inadequate or insecure food source remains an issue for disadvantaged populations in the United States and around the world. There's a term called food desert. It's a term used to describe geographic areas that lack grocery stores or other establishments in which low-income individuals are able to purchase foods with high nutritious value. So, not only education is important in being aware of what constitutes a good diet, but having access to affordable healthy food is a central component of leading a healthy lifestyle. When we think about food, now the growing problem is excess calorie intake as well and lack of a nutritious diet, which leads to higher rates of obesity in childhood. Moving on to housing, having affordable and stable and safe housing influences health in a number of ways. Homelessness can lead to malnutrition, lack of medical care, drug use, and violence. Other health hazards such as having mold, dust, lead paint, cockroaches, inadequate sanitation, unsafe structural conditions. These are all hazards that can be present in a home. Next, coming on to education. Even within the same overall socioeconomic status, those with more education tend to experience better health compared to those with lesser education. In the United States, increasing the high school graduation rate is now a leading indicator of healthy people. A collaborative initiative of the United States Department of Health and Human Services. Moving on to work. Being employed tends to be better for health compared to being unemployed. Type of employment can also affect health. Some jobs are more hazardous to health than others. And job satisfaction and stress in the workplace contribute to health and disease. And those who are unemployed also face psychological consequences due to anxiety and stress that can be associated with lack of job security and inability to adequately provide for their families. Moving on to stress itself. Stress is the social and psychological response with biological consequences. It is a response to certain stress-promoting factors. Some such circumstances can cause increased anxiety and worry. Sustained periods of stress can negatively affect physical health due to the body's fight or flight response, which increases the heart rate and cortisol levels. And over time, stress can lead to conditions such as cardiovascular disease and depression. Moving on to transportation. Transportation also affects health in a number of ways. By driving less and walking and cycling and use of mass transit, people increase their physical activity levels. It is becoming even more important to find ways to integrate physical activity into our lives. As we see, there's a more of increasing sedentary activities and obesity in the United States. Opting for walking and cycling and mass transit increases social contact, which can serve as a protective health factor. But right now, at the times of COVID, we also know that being indoors is one of the main transmitter of illness. Being outdoors is considered lesser, I mean not in crowds though, but playing in outside or public areas, but without a lot of crowds is good for your respirations. So relying less on cars also reduces air and noise pollution, contributing to environmental health as well. Therefore, city planning can have an impact on health. Moving on to place. Where you live affects your health. For example, those living in rural areas have fewer healthcare services available nearby, whereas those living in urban areas are exposed to increased air pollution from factories and vehicles. So the built environment affects health. Whether there are safe places to be physically active, including walking, biking trails, and green spaces, easy access to nutritious food. So that's why place is important or key determinant of health as well. Then coming on to access to health services. Having access to preventive health services and medical care contributes to overall health. This access to services are often limited by health insurance. By ACA, Affordable Care Act, we see that the aim of the ACA was to reduce the number of people who are uninsured in the United States. This increases the access to health services and would promote health equity. So these are the 10 key categories of social determinants of health. So how do these social determinants affect health? These social determinants contribute to a wide variety of diseases rooted in lifestyle, environmental, and social factors. Now we have to look at one term called health disparity. So health disparity is a type of difference in health that is closely linked with social or economic disadvantages. Health disparities negatively affect groups of people who have systematically experienced greater social or economic obstacles to health. These obstacles may be linked to discrimination or exclusion. This may be race, their ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic status, gender, disability, mental health, social orientation, and geographical location. These are various social and economic obstacles to health, and these causes health disparities. It affects both physical and mental health. Let's look at some diseases and identify what are these disparities in health that we are talking about. Looking at coronary artery disease. Black men and women are much more likely to die of heart disease and stroke compared to white men and women. Looking at colorectal cancer screening, people with lower educational level and lower income had lower rates of screening compared to those with higher educational level and higher income. Moving on to air pollution. Because of racial and ethnic minority groups are more likely to live in most polluted sections of urban areas, they continue to experience a larger impact of air pollution. Moving on to motor vehicle crashes. Men of all races and ethnicities are 2 to 3 times more likely to die in motor vehicle crashes than women. And these death rates are twice as high among American Indians or Alaska Natives. Moving on to HIV. Racial and ethnic minorities, with the exception of Asian or Pacific Islanders, experience higher rates of new HIV virus diagnosis than whites. And so is that with men who have sex with men. There is increased rates among Black and American Indian or Alaska Native males, as well as men who have sex with men, while rates hold steady or are decreasing in other groups. Moving on to influenza vaccination. We see that whites aged 65 years and older consistently have higher rates of influenza vaccine coverage compared to all other races or ethnicities, while non-Hispanic blacks experience the lowest rates of flu vaccine coverage. So now we see what are these health disparities and based on the social determinants. So let's look at, can health behavior be changed? We see that much of the preventable disease and disability today in the United States are related to the behavior of individuals, from cigarette smoking to obesity, from intentional to unintentional injuries, from sexual behavior to drug abuse. Health issues can be traced to the behavior of individuals. Some health behaviors are intentional, whereas others are not motivated by health concerns. For example, you getting a mammogram may be intentional health behavior, but putting a seatbelt or driving in the speed limit may be due to avoiding tickets. So because of a negative consequence, to avoid a negative consequence, you're performing a particular behavior. So behavioral change is possible for both the better and for the worse. Some examples of behavioral changes is reduction in cigarette smoking by means of public policies, use of seat belts, back to sleep practices for infants to reduce sudden infant death syndrome. But some behaviors are easier to change than others. Why are some individual health behavior easier to change? So behavior change is easier when one behavior can be substituted for a similar one that is considered acceptable and convenient. One example is substitution of Tylenol for aspirin to prevent Ray's syndrome. So it was just substituting one for the other, which is considered acceptable. Another example is Back to Sleep campaign, which was quite successful in reducing the rate of deaths from sudden infant death syndrome. In both of these cases, an acceptable and convenient substitute was available, making the needed behavioral change much easier to accomplish. Along with the knowledge, incentives such as reduced cost, increased availability, and improvements in ease of use can encourage rapid acceptance and motivate behavioral change. For example, if we have easier to install child restraint system, this have increased the use of child restraints at home. Having greater insurance coverage and widespread availability of modern mammography equipment has led to an increase in the number of mammograms performed. So based on the availability, these behaviors were adopted. But certain behaviors are difficult to change, such as obesity, or those which have an addictive element, such as cigarette smoking. Individual interventions aimed at smoking cessation or long-term weight control generally succeed less than 30% of the time, even among motivated individuals. So even intensive interventions with highly motivated individuals cannot be expected to be successful more than 50% of the time. So successful behavioral change requires that we understand as much as we can about how behavior can be changed and what can we do to help. So how can individual behavior be changed? So the individual behavior can be affected by various factors. These factors are at work to mold individual behaviors. So these are sometimes referred to as downstream factors, mainstream factors, and upstream factors. These factors influence our individual behavior, and when we have systems and policies to affect these factors, an individual's behavior can also be altered. So let's look at what are these factors. First one, downstream factors. So downstream factors are those that directly involve an individual and can potentially be altered by individual interventions. This such as addiction to nicotine. Okay? The mainstream factors are those that result from relationship of an individual with a larger group or population. So one example is peer pressure to smoke. Or the level of taxation on cigarettes. So these factors require attention at the group or population level. Finally, upstream factors. These upstream factors are often grounded in social structures and policies, such as government-sponsored programs that encourage tobacco production. So these require us to look beyond traditional healthcare and public health interventions to the broader social and economic forces that affect health. So changes in behavior often require more than individual motivation and determination to change. They require encouragement and support from groups ranging from friends and families to work and peer groups. Behavioral change may also require social policies and expectations that reinforce individuals' efforts. Now let's try to explain health behavior. How can health behavior be explained and predicted? Now we have to look at certain tools called theory and models. So theories are a set of interrelated concepts that presents a systematic view of relationships among variables in order to explain and predict events and situations. A model is a combination of ideas and concepts taken from multiple theories and applied to specific problems in particular settings. So these theories and models are tools commonly used by health researchers and health practitioners to gain insight into why people behave in healthy or unhealthy ways, and to guide the development and evaluation of interventions aimed at changing behavior to improve health. So these theories serve as a roadmap for research and practice, exploring the why, what, and how of health issues and their solutions. So in accordance with evidence-based public health principles, interventions developed based on theory and supported by evidence using these theories are more likely to succeed than those that were not. So let's take a look at a few examples of theories and their application to health behavior. So based on the level of influence, theories and models are categorized into three: interpersonal, intrapersonal, and population and community. So first one is intrapersonal levels of influence. So these theories focus on individual characteristics. They look at knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, motivation, self-concept, past experiences, and skills. Another set of theories look at interpersonal. It focuses on relationship between people. These theories acknowledge that other people influence behavior by sharing their thoughts, advice, feelings, emotional support, and other assistance. Third level of influence is population and community. So these theories and models focus on factors within social structures such as norms, rules, regulations, policies, and laws. First, let's look at intrapersonal level theories and models. So based on intrapersonal level, some theories that affect the intrapersonal levels are health belief model, stages of change model, and theory of planned behavior. Coming on to interpersonal level of influence, there comes the social cognitive theory. Moving on to the population or community level of influence comes the diffusion of innovation theory. So first let's look at the health belief model. So the first model we will look at is health belief model. So according to health belief model, it focuses on individuals' characteristics, including their perceptions and thought processes prior to taking health-related action. So the premise of the model is that personal beliefs influence health behavior. The model proposes that people will be more likely to take action if they believe they are susceptible to the condition. They believe the condition has serious consequences. They believe taking action would benefit them, with the benefits outweighing the harms, and they are exposed to factors that prompt action and believe in their ability to successfully perform the action. So this model was created around in 1950s. So this originated out of a desire to understand why so few people were taking advantage of a free mobile X-ray unit to screen for TB. So social psychologists theorized that people's readiness to act was influenced by their beliefs about whether or not they were susceptible to TB and their perceptions of the benefits of screening for disease. So this table summarizes the health beliefs models, constructs, and their application to osteoporosis. So the basic constructs include the perceived susceptibility, perceived severity, perceived benefits, perceived barriers, modifying variables, cues to action, and self-efficacy. So looking at perceived susceptibility means an individual's opinion of getting a condition. So I would say osteoporosis only happens to old women, not me. So perceived severity. That is my opinion of how serious a condition is and its consequences. I would say, oh, osteoporosis is not a big deal. Perceived benefits. An individual's belief in the advised action to reduce risk and or severity of condition. See, screening for osteoporosis will catch it early so I can continue to live an active lifestyle. Okay, that may be beneficial for me, right? Perceived barriers. Individuals' beliefs about the costs of the advised action. Screening for osteoporosis takes too much time. Who has time to do that now? Who has time to do that bone density test right now? Modifying variables. Individual characteristics that influence personal perceptions. Women in my culture are viewed as strong, therefore we do not concern ourselves with osteoporosis. Cues to action. So strategies or events that encourage one's readiness to act. Oh, my sister was recently diagnosed with osteoporosis, so I should get screened. So that is my cue to it. And self-efficacy. Belief in one's ability to take action. If I'm diagnosed with osteoporosis, I know I can manage it. I can take some vitamin D and calcium tablets, right? So I know if I'm able, if I can if I getting this test, I'm diagnosed with osteoporosis, I can manage it. So that is this health self-efficacy. So that is a health belief model and its application to a stage of osteoporosis. So now we'll look at another intrapersonal model, which is the stages of change model, which is also referred to as trans-theoretical model. So based on the trans-theoretical model of change, the main assumption is that people go through a set of incremental stages when changing behavior rather than making significant changes all at once. So they said there are 5 stages of change: pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance phase. So in the pre-contemplation phase, an individual has not yet considered changing his or her behavior. At this stage, efforts to encourage change are not likely to be successful. However, efforts to educate and offer help in the future may lay the groundwork for later success. The next phase is contemplation. He implies that individual is actively thinking about the benefits and barriers to change. I'm looking at what are the benefits if I quit drug use, or what are my difficulties to change the drug use. At this stage, information focused on short and immediate term gains as well as long-term benefits can be especially useful. So the contemplation stage lends itself to developing a baseline, establishing the current severity or extent of the problem in order to measure the future progress. Next is a preparation phase. During this phase, individual is developing a plan of action. At this point, individual may be especially receptive to setting goals, considering a range of strategies, and developing a timetable. Help in recognizing and preparing for anticipated barriers can be especially useful to the individuals during this phase. So in the preparation phase, I'm ready to take action. I have enrolled in a drug opioid treatment plan or opioid treatment program to help with my opioid addiction. So that is a preparation phase. Next is the action phase, when the change in behavior takes place. This is the time to bring together all possible outside support to reinforce and reward the new behavior and help with problems or setbacks that occur. So during the action phase, the behavior change has started occurring, but we have to reinforce this behavior. You have to continue to motivate this person. Final phase is the maintenance phase, in which new behavior becomes a permanent part of an individual's lifestyle. So the maintenance phase requires education on how to anticipate long-term nature of behavioral change, especially how to resist inevitable temptation to resume the old behavior. So let's look at an example and look at how these stages of change model have been utilized in it. So looking at an example, stages of change model and cigarette smoking. First phase is pre-contemplation. Here, individual is not considering change. Your action should be to assess the readiness for change. In those timing, you're looking for factors such as acute respiratory symptoms or individual's readiness to quit. Determining the individual's readiness to quit is important in that phase. And social factors such as workplace or indoor restriction on smoking and increased taxation would increase likelihood of entering the pre-contemplation phase. Next phase is contemplation. Here the individual thinks actively about health risk and action required. Here now is your task is to motivate change. Establish the severity of the problem, focus attention on the problem, provide information based on short and immediate gains, as well as long-term benefits. So that is the contemplation phase. Coming on to the next phase, that is the preparation phase. So prepare for action, including developing a plan and setting a timetable. Here, your actions should be set specific, measurable, and obtainable goals with deadlines. Say you're setting a quit date and possible tapering if heavy smoker, like you say if you smoke a pack a day, you continue to reduce the number each day to maybe reduce to 10 per day, then coming to 8, coming to 6, coming to 4, and finally to reduce the number. So you give a time, a quit date, and finally slowly try to reduce that level of smoking. And 2 or more well-chosen interventions may maximize effectiveness. So the medications along with peer support or individual planning or family support may reinforce or multiply impacts. And recognize the habitual nature of the behavior. So remove cigarettes, ashtrays, and associated smoking equipment. Remove personal and environmental impacts of past smoking, such as teeth cleaning, cleaning of drapery. Anticipate temptations such as association with food, drink, and social occasions. So that is in the preparatory phase. Next is the action. Here, observable changes in behavior with potential for relapse. Here, the patient has reduced the level of smoking, must have reduced it to 6 cigarettes per week. So you provide tangible rewards. Provide rewards such as alternative use of money, focus on personal hygiene, personal environment. You give positive feedback and encouragement. So take short-term, one day at a time approach. Recognize that relapse can occur anytime. So utilize group and peer support, family and peer reinforcement critical during action phase. Moving on to the last phase, that is the maintenance phase. Here, new behavior needs to be consolidated as part of a permanent lifestyle change. Your main course of action is to maintain the change. So practice or reinforce methods for maintaining the new behavior. Avoid old associations and prepare or practice response when encountering old circumstances. Recognize long-term nature of behavioral change and need for supportive peers and social and reinforcement. Negative social attitude towards smoking among peers and society along with social restrictions, such as limiting public indoor smoking and social actions such as taxation, help prevent smoking and reinforce maintenance of cessation. So there are 5 phases of change in trans-theoretical model of change. So they are the pre-contemplation phase. In that phase, your action should be prognosticate or assessing the readiness for change. Next phase is contemplation. Here your task is to motivate change. In preparation phase, your task is to plan change. In action phase is to reinforce change. And in maintenance phase, you have to maintain change. So these are the stages of change model or stages of the trans-theoretical model of change. So next theory is the theory of plant behavior. It is again another intrapersonal model. Here the intention is the main predictor of behavior. So this theory proposes that behavioral intention is influenced by individual's attitude toward performing a behavior, his or her beliefs about whether people important to him or her approve or disapprove of her behavior, and his or her beliefs about their control over performing the behavior. So according to the theory, intention determines whether someone will engage in a behavior. Therefore, interventions based on the theory of planned behavior set out to affect individuals' intention to perform a behavior. So let's look at the figure 4.1, which illustrates the theory's constructs in relation to getting a flu vaccine. So let's look at the theory of planned behavior and our choice to get a flu vaccine. So the theory's constructs include behavioral beliefs, evaluations of behavioral outcomes, normative beliefs, motivation to comply, control beliefs, and perceived power. And based on that, the person develops attitude towards the behavior. There's a subjective norm and a perceived behavioral control. And these attitude towards behavior, subjective norm, and perceived behavioral control gives rise to the behavioral intention, and finally it will lead to the behavior. So when you apply it to the flu vaccine, my behavioral belief would be getting the flu vaccine will prevent me from getting the flu. And evaluation of behavioral outcomes is I don't want to get the flu. Based on that, I develop an attitude towards the behavior. Getting the flu vaccine is a good thing to do. Based on my normative beliefs, my family and friends approve of me getting the flu vaccine. And motivation to comply, I care about what others think I should do. These forms your subjective norm. Everyone expects me to get the flu vaccine, so I should. And the control beliefs and the perceived power. Control beliefs is I just have to walk over to the campus center to get the flu vaccine. And perceived power, I can easily walk to the campus center in between classes to get the flu vaccine. So the perceived behavioral control is it's easy to get the flu vaccine. So based on this attitude towards the behavior, subjective norm and perceived behavioral control give rise to the behavioral intention. I intend to get the flu vaccine. So my behavior is to get the flu vaccine. So theory of planned behavior proposes that behavioral intention is influenced by an individual's attitude towards performing a behavior. His or her beliefs about whether people important to him or her approve or disapprove of the behavior, and his or her beliefs about their control over performing the behavior. According to the theory, the intention determines whether someone will engage in a behavior. Therefore, interventions based on theory of planned behavior set out to affect individuals' intention to perform a behavior. So that is the theory of planned behavior. Next, we will move on to social cognitive theory. So what is social cognitive theory? So it has an interpersonal model. So all these things we discussed earlier, that's the theory of planned behavior, the trans-theoretical model of change, or the health belief model, they were all intrapersonal models. By moving on to social cognitive theory, it is an interpersonal model. Here, interactions between individuals and their social systems is considered. In social cognitive theory, they believe that changing behavior requires an understanding of individuals' characteristics, influences in the social and physical environment, and interactions among all these factors. So according to this theory, changing behavior requires an understanding of the individual's characteristics such as knowledge, skills, and beliefs. Influences in the social and physical environment such as peer influence, level of family support, characteristics of the neighborhood, work and social environments that help or hinder opportunities for help, and interactions among all these factors. The key concept of this theory is reciprocal determinism. It's a dynamic interplay among personal factors, the environment, and behavior. This theory proposes that changing one of these factors will change them all. So this figure illustrates the concept of reciprocal determinism. So the key concept of the theory is that there's a dynamic interplay among personal factors, the environment, and behavior. And this theory proposes that changing any of these factors, any one of these factors, will change them all. So social cognitive theory can be applied to a wide variety of public health issues that encompass the complex interactions between individual characteristics, the social system, and individual behavior, such as drug addiction. So we will look at an example and how social cognitive theory was applied to drug addiction. The social cognitive theory has various constructs, which include self-efficacy, observational learning, expectations, expectancies, emotional arousal, behavioral capability, reinforcement, and locus of control. Coming on to self-efficacy, it is the belief in one's ability to take action. For example, I'm able to stop taking drugs. Then observational learning or modeling. This is learning by watching others. So my best friend has been drug-free for 3 years. Coming into expectations. The likely outcome of a particular behavior. If I quit taking drugs, I will be able to hold a job and earn income. And expectancies. The value placed on the outcome of the behavior. Being able to work and have an income is very important to me. And emotional arousal. Emotional reaction to a situation. When I take drugs, I feel like I'm out of control, and that is very frightening. Behavioral capability. Knowledge and skills needed to engage in a behavior. I know I need to seek professional assistance to quit my drug addiction. I know where and how to get that assistance. Then reinforcement. Rewards or punishment for performing a behavior. When I take drugs, people do not want to hang out with me, but when I'm not taking drugs, I'm surrounded by my friends and family. And locus of control, one's belief regarding one's personal power over events. Only I can get myself drug-free. Locus of control. According to social cognitive theory, all these constructs play an important role in changing a behavior, such as drug addiction. Moving on to the next theory, that is the diffusion of innovation. That is the community level theory. So diffusion of innovation theory focuses on how a new idea, product, or social practice is disseminated and adopted in a population. So theoretical constructs include innovation itself, the time it takes to adopt the innovation, the communication channels used to transmit the innovation, and the social system in which diffusion of the innovation takes place. So the diffusion and adoption or rejection are affected by certain attributes of the innovation, such as relative advantages. So is the innovation better than what it will replace? Compatibility. Does the innovation fit with the values and needs of the intended audience? Complexity. Is the innovation easy to understand and use? Or trialability. Can the innovation be tried before making the decision to adopt? And observability. Are the results of the innovation observable and easily measurable? So the diffusion of innovation theory has contributed to the concept of different types of adopters, including early adopters, those who seek to experiment with innovative ideas, early majority adopters, often opinion leaders whose social status frequently influences others to adopt the behavior, or late adopters, or laggards, those who need support and encouragement to make adoption as easy as possible. So the diffusion of innovation theory, it basically focuses on that new idea and how it is disseminated and adopted in a population. So as I mentioned earlier, there are different types of adopters. Early adopters are those who seek to experiment with the innovative ideas. Early majority adopters are often the opinion leaders, whose social status frequently influences others to adopt the behavior. And late adopters, those who need support and encouragement to make adoption as easily as possible. Let's look at an example of how innovation decision process of diffusion of innovation with innovation of sneezing into elbow was adopted. So the stages include knowledge, persuasion, decision, implementation, and confirmation. So in knowledge phase, that is before people can adopt an innovation, they must know that it exists. So communication channels such as media, friends, family members, and physicians are influencing in this stage. So knowing sneezing into elbow exists as a public health measure. So persuasion phase, people develop an opinion about the innovation. That opinion may be positive or negative. So the perceived characteristics of the innovation are particularly influential in the persuasion stage. So now we'll look at what is the advantage, what is the compatibility, what is the complexity, what is the trialability or observability of the fact. And then you make the decision. So during the decision stage, people decide to either adopt or reject an innovation. So you decide to sneeze into elbow. So the implementation is, during the implementation, an innovation is tried. You sneeze into elbow. Confirmation, during the confirmation stage, the support is sought for the decision so that there is continued adoption, continued rejection, later adoption, or discontinuance of the innovation. So you continue to sneeze into elbow as a common practice that becomes a habit after continued use. So that is diffusion of innovation practice.